Welcome to Winnow and how to use the emboss effect. So I've created a template called Emboss, and next step is to create a border so we can emboss it. So we'll create a border, but borders come up with random colors, so let's give this something a little bit more nondescript to see what we're doing. So we've got a gray border. Now let's add a style, and we'll call it Emboss. Let's call it Emboss border. Now for that emboss border style, let's add an effect, and we'll add an emboss effect. Then in the border, we need to tell it to use the emboss border style. So we're already getting a border that's looking at embossed, but we need to make it a little bit wider to fit the border. There we go. Now, the way emboss works is the margin describes how wide the emboss effect is. The inflection point is the middle point of the embossing, which in this case is the light color. If we move the inflection point, it'll move that light color to the left or to the right. So let's leave it over here. The exposure defines how bright the overall effect is. So we can make the whole thing brighter, or we can make the whole thing darker. The contrast gain, like the exposure, affects the entire emboss effect. It goes from quite harsh to blank. EV stands for exposure value, or it's a fancy way of saying brightness. I've used the term exposure value because each, like for example, -1 is equivalent to half the light, or a stop of light in camera or photography terms. So the start EV is the brightness at the outside of the effect. The mid EV is the brightness at the inflection point. The end EV is the brightness on the inside. So you can see here we are going from light at the start, or darker at the start, a little bit lighter at the inflection point, and then darker at the end. Now you can change this quite a bit by changing these. So we now made the outside quite a bit darker. So we could reverse this and go this way, and then we've got it light and then dark and then light, for example. But let's go back to where we were. By the way, double-clicking on the captions here moves you back to the default values. And finally, we have a value called the umbra. And umbra indicates which part would naturally fall into shadow. Now this is defined by the light direction. The light direction is in the General tab, and here the light direction 315 degrees is the azimuth, which indicate it's coming from the northwest. So the light is shining this way. So if we decrease the umbra here, this got darker here because the light is coming in. The light part is, we're thinking, is the top. So this part here is being thrown into shadow. But you can see down here, it's the same thing. It's light on this side, but it's become darker here than there. You can reverse the umbra by going in the other direction. And that simulates the light coming from the opposite direction to the light direction. And the gradient removes the smoothness of the curve and makes this a sharper corner at the inflection point. And finally, the blend mode. Obviously, we want it above, but if we, for example, went below, it disappears because it's now being covered up by the border. If we change the border opacity, now we can start to see that effect start to show through the border. So we'll just put this back to where it was here and put this one back to above. And that's basically how the emboss effect works. Now let's get rid of the border here. So that's all gone. Now what we could do is in the image area, we could tell it, let's try using that emboss border. And here we go. It's now embossing the outside of the image, and we could make this crazy wide or make it quite thin. So that's how Emboss works. Thanks for using Winnow. I hope you're enjoying it.